Well, thank you, guys. We're all yours. If you want to ask questions, go ahead.
Okay. Mayor Biljana Sipulovska Macedonia, Television 24. Is Mr. Assange working on something new now to reveal some new state secrets?
Well, Stella, you've been with him. I think he's working very hard on his recovery. That's been the primary objective now, and he's still in recovery. I mean, he is committed as ever to the basic principles that he's always abided by: transparency, justice, quality journalism. So Stella, you might want to add something to that.
Thank you.
Well, I just want to emphasize the kind of enormous exception he made for the importance of the report to be able to address the committee because of the importance that it has and the implications that his case has for other journalists. So he thought that this was an exceptional opportunity that he didn't want to miss, but I think everyone can tell that he is exhausted, that he is still very much in the process of recovering, and at the moment the only concrete plan in the foreseeable future is that he will continue his recovery, and that hopefully he will be a lot stronger physically and in a few months' time.
Does he feel safe now?
I think Julian's circumstances depend on what happens in the world. Julian was a political prisoner while he was imprisoned, and he was at the mercy of political forces that put him in prison and kept him there. And we just don't know what might happen in the future. The plea agreement that, I don't know, maybe one of Julian's European lawyers might want to address it further, but Julian has served his 5-year sentence. There's no pending criminal investigation against him in the United States. It's over. But of course, we've seen Julian being victimized in the past. The report from the Special Rapporteur is an important step in ensuring that safeguards exist and that not just Julian but no other person should be exposed to the kind of persecution and arbitrary detention and harassment that Julian has suffered. I certainly hope and expect that Julian will be safe from now on. There is no reason for him not to be, but it's dangerous for journalists everywhere.
Hi, Chen Wei Hua, China Daily. And I ask, I mean, Mr. Assange said earlier he was a bit tired. Do you see this as a sign of being tortured? I mean, what are the signs you observed, physically, mentally, of torture sign? And would you advise him to fight as hard as before, or just maybe more restrained? Thank you.
Without violating Julian's privacy, I think it's clear that Julian has not only suffered in the past, but continues to suffer the effects of the very prolonged and extremely torturous, harsh conditions that he has been subjected to for so many years. And the priority for us as a family is that he is able to get better. And everything else, as far as I'm concerned, is secondary.
Do you have a sort of family life in Liberty now?
Yes, we have a family life. Yes.
Assange, Julian interviewed Hassan Nasrallah and Imran Khan. They're both gone in a way. Imran Khan is imprisoned. Julian was imprisoned. He was taken out of the embassy in April 2019. In October 2019, the event 201 took place. Is Julian aware that apart from punishment of his publications, Wikileaks as a stronghold for free press was also had to be eliminated for the atrocities of the last 4 years to be able to happen? Is he aware of that?
Can you repeat the question? Was aware of what? Just the last part.
In April 2019,
Yep.
he was arrested. In October 2001, event 201 took place, and in 2020, Corona and everything. Since then, the world has been in chaos. Imran Khan has gone.
Yep.
Hassan Nasrallah has gone. Is Julian aware that he was persecuted for his publications, but also perhaps to prevent leaks coming out in the period 2020-2024?
I think he's very well of the fact that the persecution of him was to send a signal to all journalists that you stay in lane. And that is, of course, one of the most important findings of the report by Sunna here, that the cooling effect has already taken place. It doesn't apply to everybody. There are still courageous and brave people in the journalistic circles. There are still whistleblowers who in the public interest will come forth. But of course he is aware that this was an attack not just on him, but on journalism, and certainly it was, and we've always maintained that. And in that respect, it was asked a question here earlier in the meeting, what can this venue, what can the Parliamentary Assembly and the Council of Europe do to unwind this cooling effect? What can it be done to make things better again? And the reason why Julian came here is that he acknowledges how important it is for this venue in the city where the European heart beats, where European conscience is housed. The gold standards of human rights are being set here. And the most important step now for actually getting this to push back is to acknowledge this report, which acknowledges not only that Julian was wronged, but he was wrong for doing the right thing, for doing journalism. And that, as a signal, a democratic process here, speaking in one voice for 700 million Europeans, is a strong signal. That is what we need, because things are not getting any better.
What are the applications for WikiLeaks among these Rapporteurs? Is it going to change something? What role is going to take among these organizations that I respect very much? Is it going to change anything?
Still deliberating that. It's only been a few weeks since Julian walked out, and it's historic that we should, after he walked out of Belmarsh in shackled, and the English did keep him in shackles until he reached the airport. Only a few weeks later, we are sitting here where the heart of Europe is beating, where his work is being recognized, and it's being recognized that he was persecuted and wronged. So let's give him a bit of time, but we'll get there.
Thank you.
Do you think more rules will make a difference, or different rules? Because we have all the legal things in place. It's just that, like Julian said, they're interpreted in different ways and they're stretched. Does it, how do you see the benefit of adjusting rules?
I think Julian addressed it very well. I mean, it's a worry that laws are being abused. We are seeing more and more lawfare. How do we address that? What do you lawyers think? What do you think, Sunna?
Perhaps just to point out that the report points to specific changes in the law that I do think will make a difference. First of all, a thorough review of the Patriot Act to exclude it towards acts of journalism and for public interest acts. This is something that is currently not the case, and the precedent that was set by convicting Mr. Assange for acts of journalism under the Patriot Act does set a very dangerous precedent and a chilling effect for media freedom all around the world. This should concern all of you deeply, that the United States can use their espionage legislation to hunt down journalists wherever they may be in the world and make their life unbearable. So we have a call in the resolution that I call on all of my members in the Parliamentary Assembly to support, that the United States of America review its espionage law. But not only that, we also call on the United Kingdom to review their extradition legislation, which doesn't include the exclusion for a political offense. Now, the treaty includes it, but the national legislation didn't transpose it in the latest change. It was there before, but it's no longer there. And this we see as an obvious and clear loophole that needs to be remedied by the United Kingdom. That being said, of course, there were many rules and norms that were not respected, and I have to agree with Julian Assange's assessment that, you know, this reinterpretation of the norms, this is not a singular case in that. It's a very extraordinary case in many ways, but we've seen this happen time and again when it comes to going against dissidents, going against critical voices. And what is so important about recognizing that it is also prohibited to do this towards people in custody in the United Kingdom is to send a message to the countries that very habitually do this. And I will name names: Turkey, Russia, Belarus, and there are more that I should be mentioning, but I can't remember right now, that use this extraordinary abusive process to quell any dissent. And what this report is doing is trying to show that wherever we are in Europe, this is unacceptable, and that also countries like Turkey and Russia and Belarus should take note.
So Julian Assange has become sort of a movement more than just WikiLeaks. A lot of people don't know WikiLeaks. Now they become followers of Julian Assange. Do you think he is going to spend more time later on such a movement rather than just the news site or WikiLeaks?
Well, at the moment, Julian is just catching up with the outside world and trying to get a deep understanding of it. As anyone who's listened to him knows, he's a deeply analytical and thoughtful person who cares profoundly about the world around him and trying to understand what's happening and where things are going. And I think that's the first step. And he's only been free for a few weeks, and we're really just in the process of starting from zero, or from less than zero, actually, because we've relocated to Australia, and it's not just like relocating under normal circumstances. So we're not there yet. Julian is just catching up at the moment, and as I said, it was truly exceptional that he came here today, and that he addressed you, because he needs time to be able to recover. Obviously, it's been 14 years, and the last 5 have been indescribably horrific. So just give him time.
Are there efforts within the United States to try to change the law or to adopt new legislation in response to this case?
Yes, there have been over the years. I don't know if do you want to. There's a bill, I believe, to reform the Espionage Act, and several NGOs, civil rights organizations are pushing for reform of the Espionage Act. Specifically, I mean, the Espionage Act is in direct conflict with the First Amendment. It's clearly unconstitutional, but it's never been tested in relation to a journalist before a court of law. What we have now is a conviction under the Espionage Act of a journalist, and obviously it is long overdue for the Espionage Act to be reformed, and I know that the report addresses the Espionage Act, and I don't know if someone wants to.
I mean, the United States is an observer state to the Council of Europe, so we have the mandate to direct our opinions and resolutions towards them as well. And as I referred to before, there's a specific section in the resolution which calls on the United States of America to review its Espionage Act in order to protect journalists and also to protect people that disclose information in the public interest, which it doesn't provide at the current state. So hopefully they will take heed, hopefully they will listen and take prompt action.
I should add that the harm that Julian's case poses as a political precedent, as a precedent in which the DOJ has secured a conviction under the Espionage Act, the remedy is, the only viable remedy at this stage is a pardon, and this is something that we are pursuing. We know there's a lot of support for a pardon, that there's a broad recognition that this conviction is a terrible precedent, that it should never have been brought, and that the way to undo that, really at this stage, the only real way is to secure a pardon. But of course, the pardon would just be in relation to Julian, that the Espionage Act should never be used to intimidate and chill the press again. So the way to ensure it doesn't happen again to others is to reform the Espionage Act.
What messages do you have for Donald Trump if he wins, or Kamala Harris?
Well, I mean, we could continue on the same note here with the Espionage Act, and I think it's very important for all journalists all around the world to recognize the danger, the residue effect after Julian has walked out as a free man. Yes, but what remains is the fact that the tool has been used, and once you unleash that sword against a journalist, as it now has been, a journalist has been convicted for practicing journalism. That's what the plea deal even states very clearly. Who is going to be next? That's your job. That's your responsibility to pressure that sword is put back into the leash and destroyed. So the danger is still there, and it is the role of journalists to fight against it and pressure whoever comes out of the election which are in the United States. But while this tool has now been used, it will be used again. This always happened. It's always happened when you introduce something like that. Someone will abuse it. So it needs to be stopped.
There's also like there needs to be aggressive pushback, because not only is it the abuse of the Espionage Act again in the future, but the way countries harmonize with each other's legislation, especially national security legislation, and you see in the UK the way the National Security Act has been recently used and abused against journalists, dissidents, journalists, critics, and so on. And it's been used in a way that hadn't been used before. And that kind of, in a similar way, that is kind of mirroring the way the Espionage Act works. So in the absence of a concerted effort to push back on this, that's what you end up with, countries harmonizing with each other in the worst aspects. You saw it after 9/11, and now we're seeing it in relation to freedom of expression and freedom of the press.
During all these years, have you been disappointed about the reaction of the European countries who never had to have a solution for Julian?
I think the people of Europe have been absolutely admirable in their mobilization to do whatever was within their power to raise awareness. I've spoken to several members of the Parliamentary Assembly here who were moved in relation to Julian's case after having spent 20 minutes in the recreation of Julian's cell. It was parked outside this building. It was called Belmarsh Live, and it was a mobile unit that was the size of Julian's cell, and members of the Parliamentary Assembly were able to go in there and experience what it was like being Julian for 20 minutes. And that experience really, they've commented to me, really woke them up to what Julian was actually suffering in the most essential human sense. And that was an initiative of an artist, and who brought it to fruition, who I had nothing to do with it. The official campaign had nothing to do with. And there were so many incredible initiatives, big and small, that basically woke Europe up to Julian's plight. And I think the awareness within this committee, which commissioned a report to investigate Julian's case, that comes out of those efforts of regular citizens calling on their representatives to do something. So, yes, there are other institutions that have failed catastrophically where they shouldn't have. But let's give credit where it's due and talk about the institutions that have delivered. And I think it's so important that this institution really looked at Julian's case and investigated it, and has understood the grave implications, not just for Julian, who is now free, but only free because of the plea, let's be clear. Otherwise he would be in prison and maybe would never see the light of day. But that it also sets a political precedent of what's possible against other journalists, and that has to be reversed. For so long, Julian's case has been singled out for many years, not anymore obviously, but he was singled out as an exception. But obviously it creates a new reality, a new normal, and that will be seized.
Do you think that he could have a juridical advantage after the report in being recognized as a political prisoner?
I think the report is more like Julian explained in his very positive position about law reform. That the lesson from what he went through is law reform. And the report that was drafted is a first step, or could be a first step to law reform, because that's a bit his very positive message and very interesting that he went through very difficult times. He was prosecuted and convicted only for news gathering, which is a pure journalistic work, but then law reform has to come to change that, and trying that he would be the last one to go through that.
Julian was asked if he could have made things differently. He said something about the media partners, that some of them might have been chosen differently. Can Wikileaks comment on this?
I think I'm not going to name any names, but anybody who knows the WikiLeaks story of the last 14 years and the sort of rocky history of collaboration with the mainstream media will probably know where the criticism was pointed at. But just in that context, that I just want to emphasize that in reality, the quality of the journalistic work when it came to being responsible in this very vigorous and detailed work on harm minimization, WikiLeaks went further than the media partners. This notion that they were bringing in professionalism is a false narrative. I came from the mainstream media after 20 years before joining WikiLeaks and took part in all of this, and I was quite stunned to see that they were willing to be more lax than Julian was. At one point, we needed to delay a publication of the Iraq war logs by 2 weeks because we were not finished with the extremely detailed and professional redaction process. Our media partners, the powerhouses in the mainstream media, The Guardian, Spiegel, New York Times, they protested. They said, I think we've done enough. No, Julian persisted. It was an extremely interesting to be part of that project and seeing how the mainstream media could operate in the context. But that experience and that story has an element in it which needs to be recognized, and it is recognized in Sunna's report that extreme care was taken. A high level of professionalism, and that should be remembered and that should be recognized. And it's even more bitter in that context that Julian was so harshly punished through the process for the 14 years when he excelled on the professional field, not just in terms of content but also in terms of how the content was handled. That is an important recognition, as part of recognizing how the treatment against him was abhorrent.
There were numerous demonstrations with supporters that were calling for his release. Do you have any message for them now that Julian has been freed?
Deep gratitude, I would say. I mean, the aggregation of the millions of people who actually never gave up and were there and understood and kept pressing, that should not be underestimated. It was the power of the people who pushed for this to come through, for his freedom. But the battle hasn't ended. We are not in a better world. There are other battles to be taken.
The fact that he resisted such a long time and that he's free now is giving courage to worldwide journalists. Yeah. They can do it. He made it. They can do it. And as president of the International Federation of Journalists, I can tell you how many testimonies I get from this historical moment. And I thank him and I thank everybody for his freedom, and first him, of course.
May I ask the council leaders, I mean, European Union leaders, even the national leaders of European member states, I mean, from Ursula von der Leyen, they have not called for release of Julian Assange. Why are you disappointed, I mean, at that?
I think what I've learned from dealing with this case is that people find it a lot more difficult to take a stand for this particular journalist than many other journalists, and I think it has a lot to do with who it was that was pursuing him and demanding he be convicted for counts for up to 175 years in prison. And it has been my experience in my political life throughout that it definitely matters if it's your allies that are doing the human rights violations rather than the people that you'd more easily designate as human rights violators. That being said, there were some leaders that came out and spoke for Julian Assange. I'd say that Olaf Scholz did it fairly recently, and Albanese from Australia, I hope I remember his name correctly. President of the Parliament of the EU Parliament. That being said, the Council of Europe has always been a clear supporter of Julian's case. Our High Commissioner for Human Rights called for his release. Our General Rapporteur for Whistleblowers called for his release. Myself, as a General Rapporteur for Political Prisoners, as well as my colleague Emmanuel Singeres, called for his release, who is the General Rapporteur on Human Rights Defenders. So we have a fairly long history of standing up for Julian and his journalistic work and his right to freedom and freedom of expression. That being said, this report had not been commissioned, and it should have been commissioned earlier. Nevertheless, I made it, and it is now ready. And I'm very happy that it is ready with him as a free man, because I would not have expected this when I visited him in Belmarsh prison in May. That was not really what I saw. I was hopeful that this report might have an impact towards the proceedings, but I didn't imagine that he would be free. And in a very interesting turn of events, he was freed the day before we had a public hearing here in this room about his case. So everybody had to throw all of their speaking notes out of the window and sort of invent new ways of approaching the issue. What does it mean that he's been released? What does it mean that he had to confess to acts of journalism? And the conclusion then, as it is now, is that the fact that he was convicted under the Espionage Act is what is such a dangerous precedent, is what we should be pressuring our partners in the United States to change. And I think if the Americans look deep in heart at their own image of themselves, they must see that this doesn't reconcile. You cannot be the home of the brave and the country of the free, or however they put it, and imprison journalists for doing journalism. But that being said, I think the biggest concern that I'm left with after this work is how far we've allowed our fear in terms of security concerns, in terms of terrorism, in terms of how scared we are, how far we've allowed our state to justify enormous human rights violations, massive surveillance, torture, abduction, war crimes, crimes against humanity, all done in our name, all done in the name of our security. And at the same time, we've allowed them to erode our right to free speech, to erode our right to a fair trial, or to a trial at all, as is the case with many of the detainees of the United States in the secret prisons that were also exposed by this assembly. This is the real big concern that we should have, how far we have let the state apparatuses of the world take down our human rights in the name of security, because eventually this will mean no security for any of us. If we don't stand guard about our values, if we don't preserve our right to free speech, freedom of movement, freedom of thought, then we're not left with any security, regardless of how many security agents we have to police us.
Journalists from the world insist of me saying thank you to you, Ms. Aevarsdóttir, and to the committee, because they all breathe a little bit better ever since. Thank you.
Do you think the political calendar, particularly the U.S. presidential election of November, has played a role in Julian's release?
It may have, but it can only be speculated on my behalf. I don't have any proof of that. It was becoming, even in the United States, quite discomfortable in some of the left circles or in the Democratic Party. There were supporters of Julian within the Democratic Party, but I don't know how that played a part in the outcome. I can only speculate on that one.
What did you think?
Sorry,
Yeah,
sorry.
yeah.
Just hold on. Can we just take about 4 more questions? Yes.
Can I ask one?
Do you think journalists and media in general, like us, changed their view on Julian Assange and on Wikileaks in 14 years? Do you think we changed our view on Wikileaks and on Julian Assange in 14 years?
You don't actually need me to answer that question. You just go through the archives. That's pretty obvious. Yes, there is an arc in that. And I was horrified to see how easily many journalists were being misled when it came to Julian. How infactual and wrong the reporting was, and how the attacks on him from journalists became so easy, as was pointed out by Niels Melzer, the United Nations Special Rapporteur on Torture, in his voluminous report, which he put in a book. There has been an arc, and in only what I consume is a manipulation of the media, of manipulation of journalists. So we need, as journalists, to be on guard against influences and not make these missteps. But certainly have been changes.
Influence of what? Which type of influence do you mean?
Influence of basically creating the atmosphere that it is okay to start a smearing campaign against somebody, to report infactually, to fall prey to government spin or spin from other power holders. We need to be more on guard. That's what I mean.
There's a question here.
I want to ask a question to the rapporteur. I would like to ask, now that both the Democrats and the Republicans have crossed the Rubicon using the Espionage Act against journalists, it was bipartisan, you know, their role. Now, clearly they don't want to give up this opportunity to use the Espionage Act against journalists who expose state criminality at the highest level. So what's the first practical step we need to force the United States authorities to give up on using the Espionage Act and reforming it?
I am a member of parliament from Iceland. I cannot force the United States of America to do anything. But that being said, I've addressed the Helsinki Commission in the United States of America, speaking on behalf of political prisoners in Europe. There I mentioned that I was preparing this report. Should I be invited again, I will speak on his case and I will speak on the Espionage Act. And this report, it is sending a message to the United States. They have observer status here, and the message to change the Espionage Act is a clear message in the resolution. Now, in terms of their willingness or not, I think, not being an expert on U.S. politics, nevertheless, I believe that Mr. Biden was between a rock and a hard place. I'm not justifying what was done, but I'm saying that, considering the immense power of the intelligence construct in the United States of America, finding a way out of this that would allow them and him to somehow save face, I think might have been a primary concern, without me knowing or being able to claim this. It's just what I imagine. So maybe this is a one-off, but that doesn't change the fact that once you put the precedent out there, it's out there to grab, and it's not only the United States that can use this precedent, it is all the other countries in the world that can point to it and say, listen, this journalist also violated our state secrecy laws. Let's go after him. Well, you know, where are you? You're in Denmark? I'll go get you there. You know, and this is the precedent that has been set. And I don't think that the United States wants to be the example that countries like Russia, Turkey, Belarus, or others use to justify transnational repression. So hopefully they will just see it for themselves quite soon.
Julian mentioned mother-in-laws and electrical cars as things that have surprised him since coming out. Are there any other things that have moved him or surprised him in the new world since he's free?
So many, constantly, but that's his story to tell, not mine. Oh yeah, self-checkouts with the robots at the
convenience stores.
Yeah, very creepy. He finds a lot of things very creepy.
What has been the reception in Australia since his return?
Julian has been received incredibly warmly across the board. Julian's freedom became a bipartisan issue, and the Prime Minister Albanese was, I think, obviously very important in Julian's freedom coming about. But that bipartisan support came about because there was a grassroots movement in Australia. There was a 80% of the Australian population were calling for his release, and I think it's a real important lesson, example of how people, if they get organized and they are relentless in pushing for justice, for politicians to deliver, they can achieve that goal, and it's only because the Australian population mobilized in for Julian's freedom that politicians were compelled to deliver. You know, if it's politics, right? So there was benefit, and you know, politicians have convictions as well, but sometimes they only act on those convictions if there's enough pressure from the public, and there was in Australia, and things came together. It took years to build, but it was, I think, essential for Julian to have support from his government in order to ultimately be set free.
All right.
Thank you.
Well, thank you very much.
Thank you to you. Stella.
And the Chris at the media.
I hope simply that the gravity of the implication for journalists all over the world has been awakened.
French warfare in US, UK, Sweden, Australia to get the full documentation.
So the press office, they have my details, and they're instructed to give you my contact for interviews. I have another meeting now that I'm running late.
I just want to congratulate you. Bravo. Bravo. Bravo.
Do get in touch.
What
Yes,
we
absolutely.
post. Bravo.
No.